Have you ever noticed how relationships seem to shift as we age, especially for women? What once felt like a romantic partnership can slowly morph into something that feels more like obligation than love. But why does this happen? What changes between the vows and the golden years? In today's video, we're going deep into one of the most overlooked yet powerful transformations in aging relationships. Why so many women begin to feel frustration, resentment, and even dislike toward their husbands over time. We'll unpack real health facts, psychological research, and wellness insights that may surprise you. And we'll also offer ways to navigate these shifts with clarity, compassion, and confidence. Whether you're married, divorced, or just curious, stick with us. This isn't about blame, it's about understanding what really happens beneath the surface as the years go by. The emotional labor gap widens with age. As couples move into their later years, one of the most persistent and silent strains is the widening of the emotional labor gap, something that many women have shouldered throughout the marriage but which becomes particularly magnified with age. Emotional labor refers to the invisible, unspoken mental and emotional effort involved in keeping relationships running smoothly. Remembering birthdays, checking in with adult children, noticing changes in a partner's mood, and managing the social glue that binds extended family. In younger years, many women accept this responsibility almost unconsciously, often while balancing careers and raising children. But as the years pass and the intensity of physical child-rearing fades, what remains is a long-standing emotional workload that has rarely, if ever, been reciprocated. Studies have shown that even in retirement, women spend significantly more time than men on household management and caregiving tasks, and that includes the emotional oversight of the entire family's well-being. This ongoing imbalance fosters resentment that accumulates quietly. In aging, when many hope for peace or personal fulfillment, the realization that they're still the default caregiver, especially to a husband who may be emotionally disconnected or demanding, can become a source of deep dissatisfaction. Unlike financial or physical labor, emotional labor is harder to quantify, and thus, harder to challenge. Many older men were raised in eras where emotional expression was discouraged, and as a result, they often rely on their wives for all emotional regulation and support without offering much in return. This expectation becomes exhausting over time. Imagine being the one to always soothe arguments, initiate important conversations, or manage every family holiday well into your 70s. It wears on the soul. As women begin to reflect on what they want in their final decades, many feel angry that they were never allowed to just be. They were always required to hold things together. This invisible role often feels less like a partnership and more like emotional servitude. Research from the American Psychological Association confirms that women in long-term marriages report lower emotional satisfaction than men, particularly when the division of emotional labor is unequal. This doesn't mean the husbands are malicious or unkind, but rather unaware, sometimes willfully, of just how much their wives are doing behind the scenes. When couples don't acknowledge and renegotiate these roles as they age, women can start to emotionally withdraw. It begins subtly: less interest in conversation, shorter tempers, a loss of enthusiasm for shared routines. Over time, it builds to quiet frustration, or even open disdain, not because they no longer love their husbands, but because they feel unseen and unappreciated. Emotional intimacy, which women often value highly in later life, begins to feel one-sided, transactional, or non-existent. The deeper issue is not just the imbalance itself, but the lack of awareness or effort by many husbands to change it. When a woman reaches a point in life where she's more in tune with her own emotional needs but finds no reciprocal effort, it erodes the connection. This dynamic is compounded by health challenges, grief, or empty nest transitions, all of which require emotional navigation that often defaults to the wife's responsibility. Some women even develop physical symptoms, headaches, fatigue, anxiety, that are tied to this chronic, unspoken emotional load. It's a form of burnout, not from work or parenting, but from the decades of being the household's emotional anchor. The result isn't always loud conflict. Sometimes it's just quiet, persistent disappointment. In relationships where these patterns aren't addressed, the wife may begin to see her husband not as a partner, but as another obligation. And with this shift in perception, affection can wane. The good news is, this doesn't have to be inevitable. Couples who acknowledge the emotional labor dynamic and commit to redistributing it, through counseling, open conversations, or mutual curiosity, often see powerful healing. But for those who never name it, the gap keeps growing, and with age, the emotional consequences become harder to ignore. For women in their 60s, 70s, and beyond, the desire to be emotionally seen is stronger than ever. And when that need is unmet, it becomes one of the leading reasons they start pulling away, not out of cruelty, but out of exhaustion. Physical and mental burnout from decades of caretaking. As women enter their later years, a major factor that contributes to their growing frustration or even dislike toward their husbands is the sheer physical and mental exhaustion from decades of caretaking, a type of burnout that few people recognize until it becomes all-consuming. For many women, their adult lives have followed a predictable but demanding rhythm. Raising children, managing households, supporting their husbands' careers, and then transitioning seamlessly into caring for aging parents. When the caregiving responsibilities seem never-ending, it leaves very little space for self-care, reflection, or rest. Even when children are grown and no longer living at home, the caretaking doesn't stop. Husbands, especially those in retirement, often become more reliant, seeking more meals, more attention, and more emotional support, all while contributing less to the daily management of life. This imbalance becomes glaringly obvious in older age, when women's own bodies begin to demand more rest and care, yet the expectations placed upon them do not diminish. The stereotype of the woman who does it all has long been romanticized, but in reality, it comes at a steep cost to her physical and mental health. Studies from the National Institute on Aging have shown that long-term caregivers, especially spousal caregivers, are at a significantly higher risk of chronic illnesses, including hypertension, depression, and even cardiovascular disease. This stress builds up gradually, often unnoticed by the husband, who may not realize the toll his needs are taking. It's not uncommon for older women to express that they feel more like a nurse or maid than a partner. Tasks like managing medications, scheduling doctor visits, cleaning, cooking, and even helping with mobility or hygiene issues fall disproportionately on wives, and the mental load can be crushing. The cruel irony is that many of these women are silently struggling with their own aging-related conditions, joint pain, fatigue, vision loss, but push through them out of a sense of duty or routine. Over time, this self-sacrifice breeds bitterness, especially when it's met with indifference or entitlement. A woman who spent 40 years looking after everyone else often reaches her 60s or 70s hoping for a break, a chance to finally prioritize herself. But when she looks across the table and sees a partner who still expects her to serve, support, and accommodate without recognition, it ignites a slow-burning anger. This isn't about hating the man himself, it's about resenting the role she has been trapped in for so long. Psychological research backs this up. Caregiver stress among aging women is strongly correlated with feelings of resentment, loneliness, and decreased life satisfaction. What many women mourn is not just their physical energy, but their lost identity. They grieve the hobbies they never had time for, the career paths they sidelined, and the dreams they shelved to meet everyone else's needs. This sense of regret is often compounded by the realization that their partner may not even be aware of these sacrifices, let alone grateful for them. The mental fatigue becomes harder to shake with age, especially when cognitive clarity begins to fluctuate and emotional resilience is diminished. When women feel stuck in an endless loop of giving with little in return, their attitude toward their husbands naturally begins to sour. Instead of companionship, they feel burdened. Instead of admiration, they feel used. The physical symptoms of chronic stress, muscle tension, insomnia, digestive issues, become daily realities, further fueling the cycle of discontent. The saddest part is that many of these women don't speak up. They've spent so long keeping the peace, minimizing their own needs, that they don't know how to ask for help, or fear it won't be given if they do. The silence becomes its own prison. But recognizing this pattern is the first step toward change. Some couples are able to rebalance these dynamics in later life through therapy, support groups, or honest conversation. When a husband acknowledges his wife's exhaustion and makes real efforts to share the load, the entire relationship can shift. But when that recognition never comes, the burnout only deepens, and what's left is a woman who has nothing left to give and no reason to pretend otherwise. Aging shifts priorities, and some men don't adapt. As the aging process unfolds, a profound shift in personal priorities often takes place, particularly for women. After decades of navigating the roles of wife, mother, employee, and caregiver, many women arrive in their 60s and 70s with a clearer sense of what they want out of life. There's a renewed focus on emotional peace, spiritual growth, health, autonomy, and meaningful connection. These shifts are not sudden, but they are significant, and when a husband does not evolve alongside them, friction starts to build. One of the key differences is that many men, consciously or not, double down on old habits and expectations, holding on to routines or behaviors that suited a younger, more traditional marital dynamic. But while they may remain comfortable with those dynamics, their wives often experience a growing discomfort. It's not uncommon for women to become more reflective in later life, often seeking depth, introspection, and purpose beyond their roles in the family. If their husbands are unwilling or unable to engage in this inner evolution, it leaves the woman feeling emotionally stranded. She may want to discuss books on aging, take up mindfulness practices, volunteer, or travel to places with personal significance. But if her partner mocks, dismisses, or simply shows no interest in these new pursuits, it sends a painful message that her growth is not valued. Research from the Journal of Marriage and Family has found that women tend to report higher marital satisfaction in later years when their partners support their emotional development and engage in shared new experiences. The absence of this support leads to a sense of being emotionally mismatched. The wife may feel like she's entering a new season of life while her husband remains rooted in the past. This creates an invisible wedge between them. What was once tolerable, his rigidity, his aversion to change, his reluctance to communicate, becomes unbearable when she begins to see life as finite and every moment as precious. The reality of mortality sharpens her priorities, and she's less willing to waste time in a relationship that feels stagnant or emotionally flat. The woman who once tolerated silence at the dinner table now craves real conversation. The one who once accepted routines now longs for spontaneity and joy. But if her husband resists these changes, preferring television to travel or routine to reinvention, her dissatisfaction deepens. This emotional mismatch is not about malice, it's about evolution. If one partner changes and the other doesn't, resentment is inevitable. Aging is a powerful mirror, forcing both men and women to reevaluate what matters most. But when women look into that mirror and realize their needs have shifted, and their partner isn't willing to grow with them, they begin to feel emotionally isolated. Over time, this isolation breeds contempt, especially if the husband becomes dismissive or controlling in response to her attempts at change. Some women describe feeling suffocated by their husband's inertia, like they're dragging an anchor through the final chapters of their lives. Others express regret, wishing they had voiced their discontent sooner or demanded more mutual growth. When a woman senses that her partner is not just uninterested in her evolving self, but actively threatened by it, the emotional bond begins to fray. There's a quiet grief that settles in when you realize the person beside you no longer speaks the same emotional language. And while many women stay in these marriages out of habit, finances, or fear of loneliness, their inner lives begin to drift further and further away. The decline in emotional intimacy leads to a sharp drop in physical affection as well, creating a hollow partnership that's more about logistics than love. In this void, some women experience a personal renaissance, rediscovering passions, forming new friendships, or investing more in their health and happiness. But their marriages often remain emotionally desolate. The solution isn't easy, but it is possible. Men who show curiosity, flexibility, and a willingness to grow alongside their wives often find a renewed sense of connection and purpose. But those who resist change, ignore their partner's evolving needs, or cling to outdated marital roles risk losing the most important connection of all, the one that turns mere cohabitation into meaningful companionship. Men's health decline often becomes the woman's burden. As couples grow older together, an undeniable reality begins to shape their daily lives, the physical decline that often accompanies aging. Statistically, men experience more serious health issues earlier than women, with higher rates of heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and cognitive impairment. While this alone is a sobering truth, what compounds the difficulty is the way these health problems impact the dynamics of a long-term marriage, often transforming the woman from a partner into a full-time caregiver. And while love and commitment certainly play a role in motivating a woman to care for her ailing spouse, the cumulative burden of this responsibility can drastically alter her emotional connection to him. What once was a relationship based on shared interests, conversation, and mutual support becomes, over time, a one-sided relationship centered on appointments, medications, hygiene assistance, and round-the-clock monitoring. For many women, this shift doesn't come with adequate support or even acknowledgement. The assumption is often that she will take on this role without question, regardless of her own physical or mental limitations. Studies from the Family Caregiver Alliance show that over 70% of spousal caregivers are women, and most report experiencing chronic stress, poor sleep, weight gain, and increased depression as a result. What starts as concern and compassion often spirals into fatigue and frustration, especially when caregiving responsibilities consume every aspect of daily life. This shift is not just logistical, it's deeply emotional. The woman who once enjoyed lively conversations and companionship with her husband now spends her days reminding him to take his pills or helping him bathe. The man she once looked to for protection or partnership may now be unrecognizable, angry, confused, or emotionally distant due to illness or cognitive decline. And while none of this is his fault, the effect it has on her well-being is profound. The emotional toll of watching a loved one decline, especially when you are the one managing every detail of that decline, cannot be overstated. Women in this position often feel trapped, not just by the circumstance but by the social expectation that they will endure it silently and indefinitely. As her own needs go unmet, her sense of self begins to dissolve, leading to a slow erosion of emotional warmth toward her husband. Resentment creeps in, not because she wishes he were ill, but because she's overwhelmed by the weight of being his sole caregiver. Friends and family may praise her for being strong or devoted, but those compliments do little to ease the isolation and physical exhaustion she feels day after day. Intimacy fades, not just physical, but emotional, as the roles in the relationship become lopsided. The woman, once a wife, becomes a nurse, scheduler, and sometimes even a disciplinarian. The relationship becomes defined not by shared joy, but by survival logistics. If he becomes irritable or uncooperative, which is common in cases involving chronic pain or dementia, her emotional reserves are depleted even faster. And for women who are dealing with their own health struggles, this imbalance becomes even more glaring. Many find themselves managing a sick partner while quietly suffering with arthritis, insomnia, or depression, never getting the chance to voice their own pain. This imbalance often breeds guilt, which makes the resentment harder to process. How can she be angry at a man who's suffering? But she is, because while he's sick, she's silently breaking too. The emotional weight of that contradiction becomes unbearable over time. Her resentment is not rooted in cruelty, but in a desperate cry for shared responsibility, for someone to ask, "How are you holding up?" The truth is, many women over 60 live in marriages that have become caregiving contracts, where love is tangled with duty and joy is replaced by exhaustion. Without outside support, breaks, or even simple acknowledgement, this burden hardens the heart. It becomes difficult to feel softness or affection toward someone who now represents a never-ending list of responsibilities. And for many women, the sense of partnership dies long before either spouse passes away. The key to preventing this emotional fallout lies in preparation and shared accountability. Husbands who take proactive steps to manage their health, engage in preventive care, and plan for future support systems relieve their wives of some of this emotional load. Equally important is the presence of community resources, extended family involvement, and honest conversations about limits and boundaries. Without these, the woman becomes a silent casualty of her husband's decline, not because she lacks love, but because she's been carrying too much, for too long, without anyone asking if she's okay. Post-retirement identity crises cause marital strain. When retirement arrives, it's often imagined as a peaceful reward, a time to relax, travel, and finally enjoy the fruits of one's labor. But for many couples, especially women, retirement reveals fault lines that had long been hidden beneath the surface of daily routines. One of the most common but under-discussed challenges is the identity crisis many men face after leaving the workforce, and how that crisis spills into the marital dynamic. For decades, a man's sense of self has often been closely tied to his career, status, and ability to provide. When that structure disappears, some men flounder, struggling to redefine themselves in a world that no longer offers them a clear role. This transition can trigger unexpected behaviors, withdrawal, irritability, or even clinginess, as the man subconsciously searches for purpose. Unfortunately, this often places emotional and logistical pressure squarely on the wife. She, who may have long dreamed of a quieter or more fulfilling post-retirement life, now finds herself living with someone who is either emotionally absent or increasingly demanding of her time and attention. Many retired men, lacking direction, begin to shadow their wives, following them around the house, asking what's for lunch an hour after breakfast, or seeking constant interaction in ways they never did before. What might seem like harmless or even sweet dependence becomes, over time, stifling. The woman, having finally reached a stage where she hoped to rediscover herself, feels instead like she's being consumed by a partner who never cultivated his own identity beyond work. Studies from the Institute for Family Studies have shown that marital satisfaction in retirement is significantly lower when one partner lacks independent hobbies or social outlets. In most cases, it's the wife who maintains friendships, volunteer work, or personal projects, while the husband flounders in search of a new rhythm. This imbalance breeds resentment. What was once a partnership becomes a lopsided coexistence where one person is evolving and the other is stagnating. The woman begins to feel suffocated, not out of malice but from the constant presence of someone who now sees her as their primary, if not only, source of entertainment, purpose, and validation. This is especially problematic when the man expects his wife to fill the emotional gap left by his job. He may unconsciously pressure her to play multiple roles: cheerleader, organizer, motivator, even therapist. And if she resists, seeking her own peace or autonomy, he may perceive it as rejection. Over time, this misunderstanding deepens. The wife feels drained by his emotional dependence, while he feels abandoned in his search for post-career relevance. This dynamic is made worse if the man becomes defensive or dismissive when his behavior is gently addressed. Instead of self-reflection, some men retreat into anger, denial, or passive-aggressive habits that only widen the emotional gap. Meanwhile, the woman who hoped for companionship and shared growth in retirement now finds herself parenting a man who is emotionally regressing. The shift from provider to dependent can happen subtly but carry enormous weight. The household rhythm changes. Quiet mornings become filled with complaints. Free afternoons are interrupted by aimless questions or criticisms. And in households where the man never learned basic self-care skills, like cooking, laundry, or time management, the burden on the woman grows heavier still. The emotional toll of having to train a grown adult at this stage of life can lead to significant frustration. She begins to miss solitude. She craves stimulation, challenge, laughter, things that feel increasingly out of reach when every day becomes a loop of caretaking and hand-holding. Many women express feeling like their homes have been invaded, not by a stranger, but by a man they once loved, who now feels foreign and unfamiliar. The reality is, retirement is not just a lifestyle change, it's a psychological reckoning. And when one partner embraces this transition with openness and the other resists it or falls apart, the marriage suffers. For women, this disconnect can become unbearable. They no longer see their husbands as partners in life's next adventure, but as emotional weights that hold them back. Yet, it doesn't have to be this way. Men who prepare for retirement by cultivating interests, friendships, and a sense of inner purpose fare far better emotionally, and so do their marriages. The key is mutual growth. When both partners take responsibility for their post-retirement happiness, the home becomes a space of renewed connection rather than quiet discontent. But when only one does the work, while the other leans in out of habit or helplessness, love often fades, replaced by resentment, boredom, or even quiet contempt. The rise of female self-awareness and independence in later life. One of the most powerful and often unexpected transformations that takes place in a woman's later years is the rise of self-awareness and independence, a development that can radically alter her relationship with her husband. After a lifetime spent tending to the needs of others, many women begin to experience a personal renaissance in their 60s and 70s, reclaiming time, identity, and emotional space they once sacrificed. With children grown and careers winding down, the pressure to constantly serve and perform for others diminishes, leaving room for reflection and the rediscovery of one's own values, passions, and desires. In this clarity, many women begin to see their marriages in a new light, not through the lens of routine or tradition, but through the lens of truth. They begin to ask hard questions they never had the time or courage to face before. Do I feel seen in this relationship? Do I feel valued, respected, emotionally nourished? For many, the answers are sobering. What was once tolerated in the chaos of family life becomes intolerable in the stillness of retirement. This new self-awareness brings with it a hunger for autonomy, meaning, and joy, things that may have been deferred for decades. And if their husbands are unable or unwilling to support this growth, or worse, feel threatened by it, the emotional divide widens. This isn't about rebellion, it's about authenticity. Women begin to step into their power not because they're trying to leave their husbands, but because they're finally listening to themselves. They may start prioritizing their health in a new way, taking solo vacations, pursuing hobbies, reconnecting with old friends, or deepening spiritual practices. And often, this newfound independence is misinterpreted by their husbands as rejection or selfishness, when in truth, it is a long overdue act of self-preservation. The result is a clash of expectations. She seeks freedom and self-expression, while he expects the old dynamics to remain unchanged. This resistance can manifest in subtle control tactics, guilt-tripping, criticism, passive aggression, that only reinforce her decision to detach. The more she grows, the more clearly she sees the ways in which her emotional needs were minimized or ignored over the years. And with that awareness comes a sense of injustice. She begins to see her husband not just as a man she married, but as someone who benefited from her silence, her sacrifices, her suppression. This realization doesn't always lead to divorce, but it often leads to emotional distance. She stops trying to change him. She stops arguing. She simply pulls inward, choosing herself over a partnership that no longer feels mutual. Studies from the University of Michigan's Institute for Social Research have found that marital satisfaction for older women increases significantly after widowhood or separation, particularly when they felt stifled or unsupported in their marriages. While this may sound bleak, it actually underscores a deep truth. Women are increasingly unwilling to spend their final decades living half alive in relationships that diminish their spirit. And this shift is not driven by bitterness, but by clarity. The aging process strips away illusion. There is less time to pretend, to placate, to endure. Many women become bolder, more honest, more willing to speak truths that were once buried under politeness or fear. This courage to live fully and unapologetically often comes as a shock to husbands who never anticipated such transformation. They may find themselves confused or hurt by their wife's emotional withdrawal, not realizing that it's not sudden, it's cumulative. It's the quiet echo of years of unmet needs, unanswered questions, and unseen sacrifices. But it's also a call to action. For the men who are willing to meet their wives in this new chapter, with humility, curiosity, and a desire to grow, the relationship can be reborn into something more equal, more real. But for those who cling to outdated roles or ignore their partner's awakening, the risk is not just emotional disconnection, it's irrelevance. The woman who has found herself is not likely to shrink back into silence. And the woman who finally feels free will not give that freedom up easily, even for the comfort of routine. The rise of female self-awareness in later life is not a threat to marriage, it's a challenge. A challenge to evolve together or drift apart. A challenge to move from hierarchy to harmony. And ultimately, it's an invitation to build a new kind of love. One that is rooted not in duty, but in mutual respect, emotional presence, and the courage to see one another fully, even after all these years.